Okay, chapter 7 of 2 Kings. We started chapter 7 last week. Chapter 7 presents to us, I think, some very profound spiritual principles. Very profound lesson in this. What's the setting? Where are we? What's going on in Samaria at this time?
It's seized by Aram.
Yeah. So Syria has laid siege to Samaria. And how bad are things in Samaria?
We eat for children.
Yeah, about as bad as they can be. Are we in the middle of something? Sorry. All right, let's all get on the same page. All right, we're in Samaria. Things are tough in Samaria. Things are so bad, as Lon said, that people are actually eating their own children. I think that the situation in Samaria is basically hopeless. And so what happens? In chapter 7, God sends Elisha to bring a message. And Terry, why don't you start reading for us in chapter 7.
Elisha said, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel, at the gate of Samaria." The officer whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen?" "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it."
Okay, pause right there just a second. Sorry, we're going to be dealing with several characters. I've written them on the board. They all represent something in this scene that we have. And again, I believe it represents this reflects and this conveys to us a very profound spiritual principle. So what happens? Even before this, as Lon said, things are terrible in Samaria. The Syrian army has surrounded Samaria. People can't get in, they can't get out. The food source has dried up. They're even eating their own children at this point in time. The king, in the last chapter, has made a pronouncement about Elisha. What has the king said?
He wanted to kill him.
He wanted to kill him, yeah. And why does the king want to kill Elisha?
He's blaming all this on God, I guess.
Yeah.
So Elisha represents God, I guess.
Exactly, that's exactly right. So there's a great famine. Not only is Samaria besieged by an enemy, there has been a famine in the land. So things are just about as bad as they can possibly be. But then Elisha comes on the scene. And remember, what is the general ministry of Elisha? The ministry of Elijah was prepare for judgment. The ministry of Elisha is what?
Get ready for redemption.
Get ready for blessings, because the blessings are getting ready to fall on you. Elisha's ministry is a ministry of God's grace. And so, I read one commentator said that more miracles were witnessed during the life of Elisha than anyone else in the Old Testament, and really anyone other than Jesus himself. I didn't try to number all of them. We know that a number of miracles obviously occurred during the time of Moses, but we certainly have seen very many during the time of Elisha. And this is a very profound, a very powerful miracle as well. For the people of Samaria, you really can't imagine a circumstance being any worse than they're in, right? They're captured, they can't get in, they can't get out, they're starving. They're in an absolutely hopeless and helpless situation. And then Elisha comes onto the scene, speaking the word of God, and he says what? How do you summarize what Elisha's message was?
It's just going to be 180 tomorrow morning.
Yeah, he said, this time tomorrow, everything's going to change. This time tomorrow, you're not going to be starving. Everything's going to be back to normal. You're going to be blessed. And what is the response of the royal official?
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, he says, even if God would open the gates, meaning like no matter what God can do, it can't happen.
Yeah, he said even if God would pour out all of his grace and use all of his power, he said, I still don't believe it.
He couldn't do it.
That he couldn't do it. And then the scene changes, and it changes over to 4 lepers. Warren, would you pick up there in verse 3? Okay. Chapter 7, verse 3.
Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, why stay here until we die? If we say, we'll go into the city, the famine is there, and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Armenians and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die.
Pause right there. So 4 lepers, what does leprosy connote in the Old Testament?
Sin.
Sin. Sin and really, again, desperation. Because if you had leprosy, you were doomed to die a miserable death, right? And so it is symbolic of what sin brings on. But these lepers, it says, where they are is very interesting. It says these 4 leprous men are where?
At the entrance to the gate.
Yeah, they're basically right there at the gate, and they're saying, so what are we going to do now? All right, if we stay here, we're going to die. If we go back into the city, we're going to die. If we go into the camp of the Syrians, we're probably going to die, right? So they're recognizing the reality of their situation. Whatever they do, wherever they go, the likelihood is they're going to die. And so they make the election. Well, we're not going to stay here and die, and we're not going to go backwards and die, so we may as well move forward because we may live, but if we don't live, we're going to die because we're doomed. So they move forward, and something profound happens. Read on.
At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Armenians. When they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there, for the Lord had caused the Armenians to hear the sounds of chariots and horses and a great army. So they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and the Egyptian kings to attack us. So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives.
All right, pause right there. So why did the Aramean army leave?
Because they thought they heard chariots and horses and a great army.
Yeah. It could have been a couple of things. What could this have been?
God's
chariots of fire that we
Yeah, could have been
said nobody could see.
yeah, could have been the chariot, the horses and the chariots of fire that the servant that Elisha saw, and the servant of Elisha, when he had his eyes open, he saw it. But other scholars say that what this sound could have been was that God magnified the sound of these 4 lepers walking towards the camp, and that's what scared him away. Either way, pretty interesting, isn't it? But there's no doubt but that God is at work here, and God is at work in a mighty way, because what does he do? He totally scatters this enemy army that had surrounded Samaria and was about to bring about the horrific doom and death of everybody within the city. Verse 8. Sarah, you want to read?
Then the men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp and entered one of the tents. They ate and drank and carried away silver, gold, and clothes, and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also.
So they're going in there seeing all this wonderful stuff here, gold and silver and clothes and food and everything else, and they're taking it and they're going out and they're hiding it. All right, they did it one time, they came back, and they said, well, nobody's here now, so they did it again. And so they come back. Read on.
It says, then they said to each other, we're not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace. So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, we went into the Armenian camp, and not a man was there, not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents left just as they were. The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. The king got up in the night and said to his officers, I will tell you what the Armenians have done to us. They know that we are starving, so they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into their city. One of the officers answered, have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Their plight will be like that all of Israelites left it here, yes, they will only be like all those Israelites who are doomed. Let us send them and find out what happened. I'm not reading anymore.
Okay, Joanne?
Let's see.
Verse
Verse
14.
14.
Yeah.
Therefore they took 2 chariots with horses, and the king sent them in the direction of the Syrian army, saying, Go and see.
All right, so what's happened? The 4 lepers come back. Well, first off, the lepers realize that after they take basically everything that they can handle, they say, you know what? We're not doing the right thing. They say, this is a day of good news. They've come to the realization that, hey, that this is something really miraculous that's happened. This is just something we can't explain. And the goodness is not just for us. Really, the goodness is for everybody. Even the people in Samaria who have rejected us, because these guys they were lepers, they were outcasts, right? But even though they've been rejected, they say, you know what, we really owe it to the rest of the city to report back to them that the news of today is good. This is a great and momentous day, that the word of the Lord that has been pronounced through Elisha really has come true in a way that nobody can understand. So they go back and they tell the news, and the news gets to the king, and what's the king's reaction?
Thinks it's a setup.
Yeah,
It's pretty, actually fairly smart.
yeah, the king says, this can't be right. They're laying an ambush. He said, don't believe it. And so the king remains skeptical. He tells the people, no, don't fall for it. Basically, the king is saying, just stay here in Samaria and die. But let's not fall for this trap. But then one of his officials comes out and say, well, let's put it to the test. Let's go out there and let's send 5 horses to check what's going on. What does that tell you? The fact that he's got 5 horses.
You got a bunch of horse meat already, huh?
Yeah, the king's been holding back.
They've been eating them.
Yeah, they've been eating them, but the king has been holding back. You know that he is not. He doesn't have the best interests of the people at heart. He would allow the people to eat their children rather than sacrifice his royal horses.
We'll eat the donkeys.
Yeah,
They did.
they did.
Something else is not Bible here.
Yeah. All right, verse 15. Joanne, keep reading.
And they went after them to Jordan, and indeed all the road was full of garments and weapons which the Syrians had thrown away in their haste. So the messenger returned and told the king. Then the people went out and plundered the tents of the Syrians. So as seed of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 sieves of barley for a shekel, according to the words of the Lord. Now the king had appointed an officer on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate. But the people trampled him in the gate, and he died, just as the man of God had said. He spoke when the king came down to him. So it happened just as the man of God had spoken to the king, saying, 2 sheaves of barley for a shekel, and a sheet of fine flour for a shekel, shall be sold tomorrow about this time at the gate of Syria. Then the officer had answered the man of God and said, Look now, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, should such thing happen? And he had said, In fact, he shall see it with your eyes, but you shall not eat it. And so it happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gate, and he died.
Okay. Again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters here in this story, again representing a profound spiritual truth. Whom do these folks or these groups represent? First, Elisha.
God.
Yeah, sure. He's speaking for God. He's making a pronouncement on God's behalf. And the pronouncement that he's making is good news or bad news? It's unbelievably good news, right? So, who's the king represent?
Israel.
Yeah, I think Satan. I think, because why? Why does the king represent Satan?
And we just as soon them stay there and die.
Yeah. Not only that,
And he's only worried about himself.
that's right. He's worried about himself. He's not concerned about the people, but he gave the order to kill Elisha, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So he really is acting on Satan's
He
behalf.
said, don't believe what God said.
Yeah.
like the devil does.
Yeah. What about the royal officer? The royal officer, he's working for the king, but I think he represents somebody a little bit different. We got the royal officer, we got the 4 lepers, we got the people of Samaria, and we got the Aramean army. Anybody want to venture a thought about it?
The royal officer, I think, is unbelievers.
Yeah. But a particular type of unbeliever too. Correct my spelling here, Nancy. I'm writing big, so I'm not so good. Unbeliever. But what also has what has that royal officer done? Elisha has declared God's grace. The royal officer, he's basically rejecting God's grace. So he doesn't believe, that's exactly right. He's an unbeliever, but he's also one who, when grace is offered, he rejects it. And as a result of his unbelief and his rejection of grace, what happens to him?
Death.
He winds up dead. Wow. Who are the 4 lepers? Take any of the other 3. What stands out to you? What are the people of Samaria, the Aramean army, the 4 lepers? The Aramean army represents what? Affliction. Okay? And as we have learned, having read many accounts in the scriptures, often where does affliction come from? From God himself.
From God himself.
God himself will often send affliction for the purpose of correction. Sometimes it's very harsh. Sometimes it's not so harsh. I mean, to me, God's correction comes in various stages that we read in the scriptures. We have reproof. Okay, we're told, God says, "Turn to my reproof, and I will make my word known to you." The scripture talks about discipline, right? It says, "Do not reject the discipline of the Lord." We should embrace that. Affliction. But beyond affliction, even scourging. What does the scripture say about scourging? That God scourges every son whom he accepts, every one of us. Okay? But thankfully, our afflictions, our discipline, our reproof is only for a short period of time, but it's for our good. We're believers, it's for our good. But anyway, the Aramean army there, I think, represents affliction. I guess the next easiest one is, who are the people of Samaria? What is their condition at the time? What is their literal condition?
Hopelessness.
Hopeless. They're dying, right? They're dying. They're hopeless. They're lost, right?
Struggling.
Struggling, yep. But they also happen to be the object of God's grace, right? And they ultimately receive the grace that God has provided to them. What about the 4 lepers? Again, they're interesting characters. The fact that they're lepers means they're sinners, all right? They have been rejected by the people. They're in the gate. I think they've been told you can't come back into the city. But at this point in time, things are so desperate. But here they are. They're in the gate, and they weigh their options. They say, well, if we can stay here, we can go back, or we can go forward. And they say, if we stay here, what's going to happen?
We're going to die.
We're going to die. If we go back, what's going to happen?
They're not going to let us in.
No, we're probably going to die. If we go forward, if we march headlong right into the camps of the enemy, if we head right into the mouth of affliction, they say, what's going to happen?
We'll probably die.
We'll probably die. But
Either way, we've died.
he said, we're dead. Whatever happens, we're dead. And so what are we going to do? We're going to march right into the mouth of the affliction, headlong.
But aren't the lepers, aren't they the church?
Ah,
Well, I thought they represent salvation because they are the ones who bring the good news of Christ back to the people of
But it's
Samaria.
also,
I think you're both right. I think you're both exactly right on key.
but it also is like you're at a stage where you gotta make a decision.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, do we stay here and die, or do we accept Christ and move forward? I don't know.
And one of the things that the lepers do that really nobody else has done is they properly assess their current circumstance, which is no matter what we do, we're dead. And that begins that's the starting point for something great. That is the starting point for salvation for everybody else. Their recognition that no matter what we do, we're dead. We're not going to stay here. No, we're not going to go back. We may as well go forward right into the face of affliction. You trying to say something?
I said seeking.
Say again?
Seeking something better, seeking an opportunity,
Yeah.
even though they are in the middle of chaos,
Yeah.
they are seeking life.
But they also didn't keep it to themselves. They shared it
Yeah.
after they
Yeah.
came to the realization.
They finally got to this point where they realized not only are they dead, but they also realized this is a day of good news. And so now that we have learned the good news, what must we do?
Share it.
They were overwhelmed, they must share it. Okay, which really kind of tells the story about who they are, and it's really what these two ladies here said.
So
And who are-
seeking eternal life with God.
Exactly. These folks, this is who we ought to be, right? We ought to be the ones who face the reality of knowing whatever we do, we're dead, right? We're not going to leave this world alive.
They're
Okay,
also
so-
sinners.
That's right. Exactly. They come to the recognition that they're sinners, and because they're sinners, they're going to die. They're doomed. So
But
what are we
they're
going to
also not accepted by the people of Samaria or the regular, which the church is not accepted by the unbelievers of this world.
do? Yeah. Right. What did these lepers owe to the people of Samaria?
Nothing, really.
Really nothing, And so they are the recipients of grace, and so they do what people should do when they are the recipients of grace, which is what? Pass it along. Okay? They recognize that they received God's grace because they deserved it?
No.
No. And so even though they know the people of Samaria didn't deserve the grace from these guys any more than they deserved the grace from God, but nevertheless, they were burdened to pass it along.
So what is the significance of the number 4?
That's a good question. What do you think? Sometimes 4 represents the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Sometimes the number 4 represents the 4 corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west. And I guess you could apply either one of them here, couldn't you? So, I think the significance of the 4 lepers, that really should be who we are, right? We are the ones who, having received God's grace, well, first off, having come to the recognition that we're doomed, we're dead. We're going to die in our sin. The only way we survive is by God's grace. But having come to the knowledge of God's grace, then what do? We share the good news and we tell everybody else, this is the day of good news.
Well, the 4 could be all the important things, as far as God, the Holy Spirit Himself, and us. All humanity has to be aware of, of God and the 3. And that's the only way we can make it out of this world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of paralleling with Jonah and Nineveh? When Jonah couldn't go back to his home and he was running away and then he went on in and did what God wanted.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think he came to the conclusion that, when he was in the belly of the whale, he's dead. He may as well do what God tells him to do, because if he survives, it could happen to him again. Good point. Somebody else have a comment about that? But the other lesson we learn about this is that when God's good news is heard by us, when we receive the message of God's grace, what must we do with it?
Sure. And I was just thinking, the thing that stuck out to me.
Not just share, also believe it,
Believe it,
right
yeah.
then, not reject it, go ahead.
But they said they took the stuff and hid it. The
Yeah.
word hid always stuck out to me,
Yeah.
and stuff. So they knew they was doing wrong, but what Christ said, if you're a light, don't put it in a bushel basket and stuff. So
That's
you're
right.
right, you gotta let it shine and
Yeah.
No,
share
but
it.
also you're supposed to hide the word in your heart.
Yeah, but they weren't hiding God's word, they were hiding.
Same thing, you can't take it with you. What were they gonna do with it? They were dying no matter
Yeah.
what, so.
But I think what Jackie says has merit, because they saw it, they valued it, and so they hid it, they took it, It's sort of like when Jesus told the story of the merchant who found the pearl of great price. He sold everything, he got it. When the guy's walking across the field and he discovers a treasure in the field, what did he do? He bought it, he had to have it, he wanted to make it his own. So I think that's a part of it too. But again, part of this is every day we should come to the recognition that we're dying. But also when God extends His grace to us, that is the day, that is the time to accept it right then. Never accept God's grace, and never have the mindset that any of God's promises are impossible. That's the problem with the royal officer. He heard the pronouncement, and as somebody said, when he heard about what Elisha said about what was going to happen the next day, he said, that's too good to be true. That is just impossible. He said, number one, he doubted that God could even do it, right? He said, even if God opened up the windows of heaven, how could this possibly be? But you know what? I think he was also doubting whether God would do it. Not just how or why would God do it. Why would God pour out His grace on this group of sinful people? He recognized we weren't deserving. But that's the thing about grace, is that we should recognize that no, we don't deserve it. But nevertheless, God offers it. And when God offers and extends His grace to us, that's the time to accept it. Never reject it. Never reject it. I think too many Christians, good Christians, reject God's grace. They reject the good news that's presented to them every day, don't they?
And like I think, as I said last week, the 15-year-old girl said she was raised in a Christian family, and when she became 15, she rejected it, the Lord, because she couldn't see anything happening. So she wasn't believing in the things that she saw when she looked around. It was just people doing things. It wasn't God.
Yeah. And another amazing thing about this story is how it was that God brought about the salvation of the people of Samaria. All right. Elisha came and he said, this time tomorrow, things are going to be wonderful. People couldn't even imagine, how could that happen? Is food going to drop out of the sky? Are all these blessings just going to fall out of the sky? But how did it come about? Who brought the blessings there? Physically, who was responsible for bringing the blessings?
The sickest people.
Yeah, the enemies.
But what I'm saying, the sickest people brought it through God.
Yeah, but even before that, even before they were made aware, God used the Syrian army, God used the affliction to bring about the blessing. How bizarre is that?
Well,
That's
most
how
of-
God works
Yeah.
in some of the most
You hear a lot of people, they don't come to
strange
know God
ways,
until they're
mysterious ways.
You said
at their wits' end.
No.
Yeah. But what Wanda said, I want us to ponder that. Sometimes that which we perceive to be an affliction, an unbearable affliction, turns out to be the source of blessings for us. And what is it? That's just the way God works, because He has a sense of humor. I don't know. kind of strange to me. I heard something interesting. We were talking last week about Romans 8:28, which you have all memorized by now, about how God causes all things to work together for good for those who love Him, those who are but called according to His purpose. And I was listening to a radio preacher. He was telling about how his grandmother taught him what that meant. And he was baking chocolate chip cookies with his grandmother. Stop me if you've heard this, but he was baking chocolate chip cookies with his grandmother. And so his grandmother was teaching him how to bake, but also was teaching the scriptures, and they were studying about that. All things work together for good. And the grandmother said, son, when God causes all things to work together, all these things are not good. Some of them are not so good. It's just when they all get together, that's what's good. So some are bad, and some are good, but when they all get mixed together, everything is working together for good. He said it's sort of like these chocolate chip cookies, and what she had done is she'd taken all the ingredients and she'd separated them out. She had some sugar here and some flour here and some shortening here and chocolate chips here and some baking powder here. And she says, now taste this. And the boy tasted the sugar. That tastes pretty good. And chocolate chip, that tasted pretty good. Well, now taste the salt. Well, that's not so good. Now taste some of the flour. Ooh, I don't like to taste that flour. Now try some of that baking powder. Put that in. Ooh, it was terrible. And she said, some of that stuff is kind of terrible, isn't it? And he said, yeah, but when you mix it all together and you put it in the oven, you bake it, what comes out? How's that? Oh, he said, it's wonderful. He said, that's all things are not good, but all things that God brings into your life work together for good. If what? If you love God and if you are part of the called according to his purpose. So again, this is another amazing example of how God takes affliction, seemingly insurmountable affliction, and turns it into a blessing. And so it was the affliction, it was the enemy army that brought all the blessings, but the blessings were all around, but it took something else for the people to become aware of the blessing. And what was it? I think you started to say that. The use of the lepers. God used lepers to let the people know of the blessing that he brought to them. What's that all about?
Well, they never would have known anything in the city. They just died right there.
Right.
There was that connection. Those guys were outside of the city, and they made the connection and brought the information back.
God used the enemy army and he used the lepers to bless the people, to bestow his grace on the people. Reminds you what Jesus said so many times. He said, the last shall be first. The last, the lepers who were the lowest outcasts, the doomed, the dying, the dead, they became the first to receive the grace.
What about when Jesus was born?
The shepherds.
Yeah, there you go, another great example. God has a way of just taking the way mankind orders things and just turn it on their heads, right? Amazing. Any other comments about that?
His ways are not our ways.
Isn't that right?
But often this is done so that we know that we depend on him and not ourselves,
Yeah.
and not what the situation we're in,
Yeah.
but depending on him. And I think that's why he allows so many of these things to happen in our life. They're
Yeah.
impossible for us.
That's exactly right. And if nothing else, we should remember that we may feel like this very day we're surrounded by some sort of affliction. Most of us are. There's an affliction out there in one form or another. And as we all know, afflictions take many different forms. But know that God's grace is available to it. Today is the day of good news. And God just may take that affliction that is causing you the most grief and use that to bring about a blessing in your life, just an unimaginable blessing. You say, how can that possibly be? Well, stop yourself right there. Don't doubt it. You see here that God took the most unimaginable negative circumstance and turned it into salvation, turned it into a blessing. So it happens. Any other comments on that before we move on?
Rick,
Yeah.
a little story about what happened to me when I first got out of high school. I went to work for this telephone company, and they had an order down at Carville at the leprosy hospital. Nobody in Baton Rouge wanted to go down there, so they sent me.
You got the short straw, huh?
Yeah, being a good soldier, you know, I did what I had to do, and that was the most awesome experience. It scared me to death. Those people, you know, had no ears, no nose, no fingers, had little paddles, you know, and they were waddling down. And it scared me so bad that I drove from Carville. Instead of going back to the office, I went home and showered and threw my clothes in the washer and, you know, tried to wash all the germs or whatever. So I can imagine those lepers entering wherever they were going,
Yeah.
were scaring them to death.
Yeah.
That, you know, they would get
They had never seen
infected, you know,
a
by
blessing like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's an eye opener, and that makes it even that more profound that the people would think that, yeah, these people that you just want to stay away from. You think they're going to poison you, but nevertheless, they're the ones bringing you the good news of the blessing.
Yeah, TV don't do it justice, you know.
Mhm.
Well, that's how people feel about Christians now in the church. They don't want to have anything to do with us, and that we're out to get them or we're evil, but we're standing up for what is right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but just like the lepers, you can't stay where you are. Doesn't make sense to go backwards. Move forward. That's what God wants us to do. Without moving, if these lepers had not moved forward, just made the decision to move forward, all would have been lost, perhaps. Right. All right, chapter 8. We talked about this before. Chapter 8 is not in chronological order. But let's read that. It's sort of the culmination and the predicate for what we're going to read next. Troy, you want to read?
Then Elijah spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, Arise and go, you and your household, and stay wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and furthermore, it will come upon the land for 7 years.
Pause right there. It's interesting that during the time of Elisha, that there's a famine that God sends that lasts for 7 years. Remember, there's a famine during the time of Elijah that lasted how long?
3 years.
3.5 years, yeah. And it's interesting because remember, one of the things that Elisha asked for of Elijah, he says what? I want a double portion of your blessing. Gets a double portion of the famine, of the bad stuff too. But he does get a double portion of the blessing, but he also gets a double portion of the curse, if you will, that went along with it. 7 years of famine that God put on the land again because the people were sinning. A form of affliction. Read on.
So the woman arose and did according to the saying of the man of God, and she went with her household and dealt in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. It came to pass at the end of 7 years that the woman returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went to make an appeal to the king for her house and her land.
Pause right there. You find it interesting here that the famine is on the land of Israel, but it's not on the land where the Philistines are. Remember where the Philistines are. Same place that the Palestinian stronghold of today, right down in here. All right. So there's a famine here, but she flees to where? To the land of the Philistines because there's no famine there? What does that tell you about the famine?
God did it.
God did it. He was very selective about where he sent the famine. He sent it not to foreigners, he sent it on his own people. Why? Again, affliction, yeah, to bring them back to him. All right, read on.
Then the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, Tell me, please, all the great things Elijah has done.
Pause right there. What did we learn about Gehazi earlier?
He had leprosy.
Yeah, he was stricken with leprosy. Why?
Because of his sin.
Because he wanted to get paid for the miracles, right? So Elisha.
But it looks like he remained Elisha's servant
This
despite
could be
that.
before that.
Yeah, I think this may have been before he was stricken as a
Oh, okay.
leper. This may be, to me, it could be what Wanda said. It could be that he remained the servant. It could be that he was healed. But it also could be that this happened before. And I have a tendency to believe that it happened before because to me this is sort of the predicate for the siege of Samaria and what's going on there. In any event, it's a good story with a good ending. Read on.
Now it happened, as he was telling the king how he had restored the dead to the life, that there was the woman whose son he had restored to life, appealing to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elijah restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed a certain officer for her, saying, Restore all that was hers, and all the proceeds of the field from the day that she left the land until now.
Wow. What a beautiful story that is, because remember, this is the woman that she observed Elisha going back and forth, and what did she do?
Yes, I'm agreeing.
What's that? Yeah, she said, there's something special about this guy. I want to have him close to me. So to build him a room. They said, I want him to come live in my house. And so Elisha comes, and what does Elisha do then? He blesses her. She's a barren woman.
Child, yeah.
She promises her a son. And she says, basically, now don't get my hopes up because, you know, I'm married and we don't have any children. Elisha says, this time next year you'll have a son. And so she has a son. And the son grows up, and then what happens to him? He dies. And Elisha, and then, but as a very important part of this story, after the son dies, what is her frame of mind?
She says, all is well.
She said,
Yeah.
her husband says, what's going on? Where are you going? Why, basically, why, it's not Sunday, why are you going to church? And she says, all is well. She's going to look for the man of God. But her mindset is that she takes comfort in knowing that God has reached down and touched her and sent Elisha into her life. And so she can't see it. She can't see the blessing, but she knows the blessing is there. So she says, all is well. And so her faith was tested, and she comes through. Her son is raised back to life. But after that, what happens? A famine comes. She has to leave the land. She gives up all of her property. And so when she's in the land of the Philistines for 7 years, she's thinking when she comes back that she's lost everything. She's lost her land, she's lost her crops, she's lost all the income from it. But then what happens? Everything is restored back to her. Again, an expression of God's grace, God's never-ending grace. She was helpless. She probably wasn't hopeless. If the king would have asked her, how you doing? She probably would have said,
All is well.
all is well. And so, you know, she had that mindset that if her mindset is all is well, God is going to continue to pour out His grace because she
It's
believed
kinda like
that God's
what
grace can
happened
fall on her.
To his predecessor a little bit,
Who's that?
Elijah, no,
Predecessor of Elisha.
yeah, Elisha's predecessor with the food and the lady and the kid, and he died, and he brought him back.
Yeah, that's right. Same thing. Same thing, except more here.
Yeah,
Except
but
more,
I just
yeah.
mean, you know, we don't know what happened to that lady if she kept eating on that same stuff or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
But,
But again, we need to remember a very important principle here is that when we go to God in faith, He always responds in grace. I mean, I think that's a promise, that's a spiritual principle, that when we go to God in faith, that He will respond in grace. And that when we receive His grace, then what do? We share it. We share it. That's what God expects us to do. And the cycle continues. We continue to go to Him in faith, He responds in grace, and we share His grace with others.
but it's just that little bit of grace, that mustard seed.
Yeah. Just a little bit of faith. All right, verse 7. Who's next? Lon, is it you?
Elisha went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, was ill. When the king was told, "The man of God has come all the way up here," he said to Hazael, "Take a gift with you and go to meet the man of God. Consult the Lord through him. Ask him, will I recover from this illness?" Hazael went to meet Elisha, taking with him a gift of 40 camel loads of all the finest wares of Damascus. He went in and stood before him and said, "Your son Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, has sent me to ask, will I recover from this illness?" Elisha answered, "Go and say to him, you will certainly recover. Nevertheless, the Lord has revealed to me that he will in fact die." He stared at him with a fixed glare until Hazael was embarrassed. Then the man of God began to weep. "Why is my Lord weeping?" says Hazael. "Because I know the harm you will do to the Israelites," he answered. "You will set fire to their fortified places, kill their young men with their swords, dash their young children to the ground, and rip open the pregnant women." Hazael said, "How could your servant, a mere dog, accomplish such a feat?" "The Lord has shown me that you will become king of Aram," answered Elisha. Then Hazael left Elisha and returned to his master. When Ben-Hadad asked, "What did Elisha say to you?" Hazael replied, "He told me that you will certainly recover." But the next day he took a thick cloth, soaked it in water, and spread it over the king's face so that he died. Then Hazael succeeded him as king.
So what Elisha said was true, that you will recover, except for the fact that this guy's going to kill you. He's going to murder you. So this is sort of the beginning of a lot of treachery that's going on in the land. Again, more,
Would that be the first waterboard?
yeah, waterboarding to the extreme. Yeah, exactly.
So where does this fall in the chapters?
I think we're getting back to chronological order now.
Okay.
Again, I think chapter 8, or at least the verses 1 through 6 of chapter 8 are out of chronological
Okay.
order.
There
But I
was
think
two
this falls.
Benedettes, right? There was a 1 and a 2. I mean, I think there was, because when I was doing the study on him, they said he either came to Benhadad or Benhadad to 1. You know what I mean? So I guess he had,
Ben-Hadad, yeah, that name would be like Ben means son, like the
Yeah.
son of Hadad.
yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. They had different kings, and it's getting kind of confusing because there's a time when there's a King Joram or Jehoram of the northern kingdom as well as the southern kingdom. Which one?
Is it right on that chart?
No, let's see. Ben-Hadad was the king of Aram. These are the
Oh,
southern
sorry.
tribes and the northern tribes.
I can't.
Let's see if we have something here. No. I don't think we have.
More than likely, if one would have took over where his dad was still king, so it's probably his son. But no.
Junior?
Yeah.
For what it's worth, you know.
Here's something I want you to see, just so some of your confusion is alleviated. You'll see these are the kings of the northern tribes of Israel. These are the southern tribes. And at this time frame right here, which is like between 840 and 850 BC, in the northern kingdom there's a king named Joram or Jehoram, and in the southern kingdom there's also a king named Joram or Jehoram. Different people, they just happen to have the same name. So. And it's interesting that sometimes they're referred to as Joram and sometimes Jehoram. What is the difference between those two?
It's a variant, my Bible says it's a variant of the same name. One's Hebrew, Joram, a variant of Jehoram.
And I read about this somewhere else, and I was looking for it this week and I couldn't find it, but there have been times that God has changed names. For example, when he changed the name of Abram to Abraham, he added the syllable ah, the AH. When he changed Sarai's name to Sarah, he added the syllable ah, which is a name for God, right? Yahweh. It's a part of his name. And so it is said somewhere that the name Jehoram, it has the EH, which is the same as AH, that God is in the name. But then when you pull that out, Jehoram becomes Joram. And so it is said somewhere in the scriptures, you'll find it sometime, that part of the reason why Jehoram became Joram is because he rejected God. All right? So when Jehoram, he's got God's name in his name, but when he rejects God, it's pulled out. So it's called, basically, you're the same God, but without God's name, God's syllable added to your name. All right. Verse.
So I have another footnote, and I can't find the verse, but it says Hebrew Ramah is a variant of Ramoth. Is that the same thing?
Same thing.
AH?
Anytime, yeah. Like when you see the words EL in a name, like Joel, that EL is El Shaddai. It's a shortening of God's name. In the same way with the AH is a shortening of Yahweh, or part of God's name that's put into a human's name to indicate that God is operating on the person's life. Like, there's many names. Ezekiel, names Ezekiel. Hezekiah. All right, verse 16. Jackie, you want to read from there? Chapter 8, verse 16.
In the 5th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, began his reign as king of Judah. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done. For he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, for the sake of his servant David, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah. He had promised to maintain a lamp for David and his descendants forever. In the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. So Jehoram went to Zair with all his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through the night. His army, however, fled back home. To this day, Edom has been rebellious against Judah. Libnah revolted in the same time. As for the other events of Jehoram's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the kings of Judah? Jehoram rested with his fathers and was buried with them in the city of David, as Ahaziah, his son, succeeded him as king. Keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
In the 12th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, had began to reign. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother's name was Athaliah.
Athaliah.
Oh, okay, Athaliah. Sounds like Pajamaliah.
Yeah.
The granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel.
Pause right there. I got to think about that for a second. Pajamaliah and Athaliah. Interesting. Different spelling. What's that? No, it's not. Athaliah, she probably wasn't named after Jamaliah. But there's
Not good.
Right.
no, that's right. There's an interesting thing we need to know about this is that Ahaziah or Ahaziah, who's now the king of Judah, his mother was Athaliah, who was the daughter of who? Ahab.
Ahab and Jezebel.
Ahab and Jezebel, that's right. And so that's significant because he is, that makes him of the house of Ahab. So we have a king in Judah who is of the house of Ahab. And why does that become important? Because in chapter 9, we know that this guy Jehu, he is tasked to go what? And to strike the house of Ahab. And he does that rather efficiently. But in the course of his killing, he also kills this guy, the king of Judah. And why does he do it? He does it
Because he is related to the king of Ahab.
he is of the house of Ahab, which is a sinful and evil house. This is a good time to stop. All right, we're going to pause right here. We'll pick up with my buddy Jehu, who drives furiously.
I still remember that.
Y'all still remember that?
I do.
Okay.
Who did you say, your grandpa or somebody put that?
Yeah, my grandfather used to.
Guys like
used to
Crazy
call-
J or something?
And my brother. What?
Crazy J?
Yeah, he called us you dad or Jehu.
I remember seeing you drive like a Crazy J, but I remember somebody else told me that one time.
Yep. He drives furiously. Okay. Well, I'm glad y'all remember something.